How's that? Is that any better?
Oh, that's a lot better.
Yeah, there we go.
That was the ticket.
What's that?
I said that was the ticket.
Yeah. No, I have the jankiest setup ever. I wish. Maybe I'll take a picture and I'll post it to you guys. So this janky setup that I have to do this interview. Before we get into Chris, I would like to say on behalf of the alpha testers, a really big thank you to VR, Ben, for letting us jump in there. Even in our pre-alpha state, you guys have opened up the doors for us to get in there. I was able to go in and test for the first time in this last round. And I got to say, man, I spent about 10 hours during that test session in game and cried myself to sleep for like the next 3 days because I knew the server was no longer available. So yeah, it was pretty sad. It was pretty sad coming down off that high, but it was a fantastic game. And from all of us, really, we appreciate the time.
Oh, I'm glad you got a chance to get in there and play it. There's I know I can speak for all of us. That makes us really, really happy. Not going to get into too many details here, but there is some pretty significant news coming up next week. So keep your ear to the ground. And I can say with certainty that you will be getting in again. So,
hey, that's fantastic news. Yeah. Hopefully, I can get this thing out, and so that everybody can be tearing up Discord, wondering, I wonder what Ben means by that. So anyway, yes. All right. Well, as everybody knows, technology has come a long way in the last 150 years, and even just in the last, what has it been now, 40 years or so, that video games have been kind of mainstream. There's been a lot of change, a lot of evolution as new tech comes available. One of the folks that has been around through quite a significant amount of the big changes that have come to video games is Mr. Chris Willis with Visionary Realms. He has been gracious enough to join us today to get down into the weeds of what some of those changes were, some of his life experiences in his area of expertise. And so, Chris, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thanks for inviting me here.
Well, we appreciate anytime the fan base for Pantheon is allowed to have any more access to any of the devs. That includes art team, communications. I mean, across the board, it really is a treat for them. It's a real treat for me as you are baptizing me with my first interview. So hopefully nothing will get set on fire, and we'll have a great time. I just wanted to go over quick with a short bio from yours. I mean, you were graduated from Cypress College in California. You have been 30 plus years in the industry, making video games. In the art side of things, we're going to get into a little bit more of what that means, because I know that it is not just art that you have to be involved in at that point. But my first question that I had about this was, my wife was an artist, is an artist, and she wanted to go into animation when she was young, and she decided that everything was headed towards computer graphics and computers weren't her thing. And so instead of doing that, she wound up going to a culinary school, a really fancy culinary school in Washington, D.C., and getting a degree in that. And so you having gone to school for art, that is something that I know that my parents would have cringed at the thought of their child becoming an artist, because that just means that you're going to have to support them for the rest of your life. What kind of experience was that for you?
Well, I actually didn't go to school for art. I'm pretty self-taught. I've just loved drawing as a kid, so I've been drawing as long as I can remember. I mean, I used to just doodle all my favorite little cartoon characters as a kid, and as I got older, and whatever it was that interested me as a kid, I would just draw. I would just draw until I felt that I had nailed it, and sort of as a perfectionist there. But like, yeah, I went to a Cypress College, but I didn't really. I was just going there to try and get my what is it? It was not not a full on degree or anything, but I went there and took some art courses, but
Okay.
it was not really to. I mean, not to get into the game industry. That's for sure. I had no intention of getting into the game industry at all. It was really weird that I fell into it.
That's really interesting then, because as far as I could dig, and obviously we haven't talked before. This is our first time kind of speaking on a personal level, but as far as I could tell, like, Sierra was kind of your first gig in the game, and I mean, at that time that you were coming in to work for Sierra online, I mean, they were a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it was really weird because I was a gamer, but only in the sense of arcade games and a few people, and I had an Atari 2600, and my friends had various other console games, but I was not really into. I was just into playing arcade games. I would go get to the arcade and the local computer store, but I wasn't really much of a computer person growing up. So it's a weird story that I fell into the whole thing with, because my aunt worked for Sierra Online. She worked in the
Wow.
warehouse, and I didn't know that because she was an aunt that I had never met. So she came down to visit my dad and had mentioned that she worked at Sierra Online. It was a game company, and I was like, my ears perked up. And so, because I'd already tried to apply, I'd applied once and I only had one interview prior to that at Interplay. I had applied to Interplay. They were just down the freeway from me. I believe it was like they were in Santa Ana. And I had an interview with them, which didn't last because it was like I didn't have any experience, and they went with somebody else who had more experience. So I had literally no experience. And so then my aunt shows up and tells me that she works there, and I'm like, can you give me an application? And so a couple weeks later, I get an application in the mail, and I had applied, and I sent them. I had already purchased an Amiga in my part-time job. I bought a little computer, and I'd been sort of dabbling or trying to come up with what I thought a computer company would want to see, just making my own interfaces, my own like little video game mock-ups, more or less, on the computer, and then I used those in my portfolio, and
wow.
And it got me the job. So it got me at least an interview. And then they flew me up there, and I was all like, nervous and everything, and ended up getting the job. So it was really kind of weird, but I no training other than self training on my own little Amiga. That was it.
Well, that's funny that you mentioned that. Most of the people that I talk to, in the art business anyway, a lot of that is a lot of just self-learning It's not so much about the degree. It's more about, do you have a passion to do this? And that's obviously going to come out in how you spend your time. And so, it makes a lot of sense. You have to put in the work. Obviously, this wasn't just, oh, I'm going to spend a little bit of time. I'm sure you were spending a significant amount of time trying to work on this. Because, doing this on Amiga, because I half remember them.
Yeah.
I had a friend that had one. But just trying to create stuff off of there. It's not easy, for sure, especially when you're working in something as creative as, kind of art and generating new characters, generating interfaces, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But to be doing it on your own, I imagine there was a lot of time sink that was going into that.
Oh yeah, I was constantly painting and drawing, and I was doing that anyways. I was always trying to get better as an artist, even regardless of whether or not I ever thought about getting into the game industry. Didn't even know what that was at the time. So I was just doing artwork, contract work, freelance gigs, doing t-shirt designs, and working, painting, guitars. I did some airbrush work on guitar, various musician guitars and things like that. And that's the kind of work I was doing in my spare time when I was just working at a regular warehouse, like working at a warehouse job, or working at the grocery store, just doing all that stuff as a kid.
But I feel like there's a huge difference between, trying to draw that stuff freehand, obviously your medium, paints, pencil sketches, that kind of a thing. But then to take that and to be able to translate that into digital graphics, painting squares.
Right. Well,
did you find that to be a hard transition there when you were learning it?
No, but not at that time, because back in 1992, when I got started, everything was hand painted anyways. Even at Sierra Online, everything was traditional art. They would just scan it in, and then it would become pixelized. So it all started out as a paint, as the backgrounds were all hand painted. Some of the characters started out as hand painted, and then they would just cut them up into animatable kind of little characters, and they had their own proprietary software for the artists at Sierra Online, so we could animate everything cell by cell. It was really pretty cool. But yeah, it was all pretty much seamless for me at that time, because I'd already been a traditional artist, and then to find out that that's how they were doing it anyways, and just scanning that artwork in was pretty much a pretty easy transition for me.
Wow. So was that kind of the whole thing, and the entire time you were at Sierra, it was all just you didn't have to really do a whole lot on the computer side, but it was a lot of just drawing?
No, eventually it became more, they made transition. They had transitioned into 3D while I was there. But yeah, the beginning, for the first, I would say a couple of years, 2-3 years, that it was a lot of hand painted, and then it became more digital. Everything was done in the computer, still using a mouse, because we didn't have tablets back in the old days. So you had to kind of get really good at drawing with a bar of soap. And that's what I called the mouse, was like a bar of soap. So it was like, so we were like drawing with that. And then eventually it became 3D in DOS. We were using Max in DOS, which kind of started, I'm kind of like answering, I guess, some of the questions that you gave me, but like,
no, go ahead. We don't need to stick to format.
Okay, cool. So yeah, it just sort of transitioned into 3D, which I ended up doing a lot of 3D. My first 3D stuff was all in pretty much on Space Quest 6. That was where I kind of cut my teeth on doing a lot of 3D. I did a lot of the stuff that you see in that game, the giant jock strap that flies. In the beginning, I did that. I animated that. I built it.
That's incredible.
Yeah, all the cutscenes, most of the cutscenes, not all of them, because there's a few that my friend Mike Hutchison worked on. But yeah, he and I both did a lot of those cutscenes and a lot of the 3D work that was in the game.
Wow. So even before you left Sierra, you were already getting into 3D.
Yeah, that was pretty much where I learned all the stuff that later became, relevant to my knowledge of 3D. And yeah, and then it just kind of kept going and from there.
So I guess that was a pretty good time to be doing that, because there wasn't a whole lot of people that were going to come in and have more experience doing 3D than you, since it was just kind of starting to be done. So
yeah, it was the perfect time. I couldn't have asked for a better time to be in the industry. It was really there's a lot of people who wanted in, but you just, I was lucky to get in. So, but yeah, it was really a good time to be in the industry for sure. And yeah, a lot of things.
Yeah.
A lot of things learned.
Yeah. I can imagine. All right. So, just kind of pushing on with a little bit more of your experience. So after that, you went to Codemasters, which I'm sure a lot of people are unfamiliar with that. I know I was, even though I was very familiar with Game Genie, which they were a part of.
I did not know about Game Genie.
You did not know about Game Genie?
No, I didn't even know who Codemasters was until they showed up. I was like, "Who's this?" No.
Yeah. So they approached you then?
No, it was all via the layoff. There was a big layoff at Sierra Online.
At Sierra, right? Yep.
Chainsaw Monday or Friday, I think it was Monday that they called it, and they just laid off like a ton of people. Asked a bunch of us to go up to Seattle. I opted out because I was one of the people they wanted to go up to Seattle, and I was so mad that they had laid off so many of my friends that I didn't want to go because it was kind of taking blood money, and I didn't want to do that. So I stayed in Oakhurst, and they gave everybody a really nice severance package. And so I just kind of was going to take it easy for a little bit, and then found out that there was a deal being worked out that Craig, what was his name? Craig Alexander. He was trying to work out opening up a studio, and he was, I guess, communicating apparently with someone from Codemasters, and so that's how it ended up happening. Is all the people who were still in town, because it's a very small town of about 18,000 people up in the mountains,
right?
And so yeah, it just turned out that I was still there. The company was interested in purchasing the building or renting the building. I don't know how it all went, but they showed up and they were opening up a studio and here in America. And yeah, and I, said, sure. I got a chance to work with some more of my friends again and on the same building and everything.
So. Yeah. That was one of the interesting things that I saw about that is they actually went in and purchased a lot of Sierra Online's old buildings that they were utilizing. So you didn't even really have to change your workspace then.
No, I didn't. It was probably a different office, but it was the same tin shed. We call it the tool shed or something like that. I think that's what we all called it because it was just this big giant metal shed in the middle of the mountains that everybody worked in. But yeah, that was. So
now that you're kind of fully into 3D mostly by this point, now there's the whole issue. Now that you're not painting stuff by hand and putting it in, now there's the well, we got to have the concept art first. We'll get that done, and then we'll take that and we'll create 3D models based on this concept art. And so now I imagine during this time you're starting to kind of do both of those things at the same time, correct?
It depended on where I worked, but for the most part, the industry became very, very it was very much more of a business than by around that time,
Right.
because it started out very mom and pop. It was very much Sierra was a very family. It was like a big family. It was like 400 people because they had half of the building was shipping and receiving, where they'd actually box and ship their own games and
Right.
and copy them, and the other half of it was the development. So we knew everybody, and it was so great. But now, as things became more of a business and corporations, sort of like larger places started buying up all of the game companies, it became much more of a business, and everything became more, I guess, I don't know, like compartmentalized. Everybody was sort of doing what they were best at, and the companies would, back at Sierra, you could do a little bit of everything.
Right.
Whereas moving forward, it became, I kind of mostly did 3D characters and 3D work. I wasn't too much in the area of doing concept as much. I would do it once in a while, but it was mostly 3D at that time, and I was doing a lot of character work.
You feel like
So,
that change in the industry was good or bad? What was your take on it?
I guess it depends. I mean, for me, it was, um, I don't know. I really don't have a strong feeling about it. It's just, I found that it's probably best to put the best people where they are best suited. And I'm not the best concept artist. I'm a good draftsman, I think, and can illustrate. But there are far
Yeah.
better concept artists out there who can do the kinds of concepts that I think games need than I can. But like there are even better. There's a lot. There's a better artist in general than I am. Um, but it all kind of just works out. I mean, I was happy to be working in the game industry. I was just loved what I do. So I didn't really mind that things were moving that way all that much, but it did stink a little bit. That like it just didn't feel the same. That was the only thing that I didn't really like, is that the industry didn't feel as friendly as it did that first 7 years of my experience.
Yeah.
Working at Sierra was just a very, very different vibe now. After that 7 years or so, it just
I can
changed.
imagine. Yeah, because then after leaving Coastmasters, you wound up at Obsidian,
Yeah.
which was a powerhouse
Well, actually,
company.
before Obsidian, I worked 1 year at Turbine, working on which is now, I think, Turbine's no longer a thing anymore. I think it's like Warner Brothers or something bought them up. But I worked on, after Codemasters, I moved back down to Southern California, where I was from, and worked at Codemasters for a year, or not Codemasters, sorry, Turbine, for a year on an MMO called, what was it? It's like Asheron's Call. Yeah, Asheron's Call. It
Asheron's
was,
Call, no kidding.
yeah, it was an
I was not aware
expansion.
of the publisher on that. Wow.
Yeah, it was an expansion they were working on. They needed people, so I went to work there with a friend of mine, and so he and I were roommates for a while, but we worked there for about a year, and then I ended up leaving there to go work at Obsidian.
Well, I mean that's even different from the other two places that you work, because now you're working on an MMO, which obviously has a different uh, level of detail, I guess, on the game side. But then
Yeah.
going straight from there to New Vegas, which is, high, realism type graphics, a very, very different type feel than that. I mean, you were bouncing around. I guess the biggest thing is it was a ton of different genres that you had worked in by this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something I guess I've always been gifted at, I suppose, is just that I can pick up styles pretty well. I can, one of my teachers in school said he said that I had a photographic memory. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was just what his take was based on what he noticed. So it just works out that I can kind of do a lot of different styles. I can do cartoony. I can do realistic. I can do somewhere in between. But yeah, working at Obsidian I was brought on for a totally different game than just New Vegas. That wasn't
Right,
even.
yeah.
I was just an additional artist on that game because I was brought on for a Disney game, a game that they were doing for Disney at the time that ended up getting canceled. So yeah, that was. It was very weird. It was a great studio though. I loved working at Obsidian.
That's interesting because I would think that would be like a far cry from what it would have been like to work at Sierra, which you obviously liked.
It was. I mean, it was and it wasn't. It was a very small studio, much smaller than Sierra. Sierra was, like I said, 400 people big, and which is not huge by some studios today. But I think Obsidian was only 100 people total, and we worked in Santa Ana. I think that's where the first studio was, and then we moved to Irvine. And it was really a very small, close-knit group of people. You got to know a lot of, everybody on the team. They had like 4 teams going at any one time. I think maybe 3 different games being developed at different times. But
yeah.
And you would, as you left one team, you'd get shuffled to another team. So that's how I ended up on New Vegas, was more or less out of necessity. We were working. I was working on Dungeon Siege 3, and
which is a fantastic game.
You like it?
I do. I
Wow.
really enjoyed it, and I know there's a lot of people that will disagree with me, but I actually had
I'm one
a
of
lot
them.
of fun playing it.
I don't like it. I'm glad you do. I'm glad somebody does, because I was a huge fan. I was so stoked because I was a huge fan of 1 and 2, and I had played those like crazy, and I loved both of them, and I was like so excited to hear that we were going to get it. We were going to get that franchise and work on it, and then after hearing all the changes that were happening, I'm like, this is nothing like the original 2. And so it was fun to work on the artwork, but I can't lie and say I wasn't disappointed. I was disappointed that they changed the format of the game so much, but I guess it was for a console, so it had to change a little bit.
Yeah. And I can kind of see where you would have that reaction. Me not having played Dungeon Siege 1 or 2. I didn't really get into them until that third one. And so,
okay.
I guess I didn't have those better ones to compare it to. I did. I really enjoyed playing Dungeon Siege 3.
Cool. Well, I'm glad.
But I totally get what you're saying. There's several, I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan. And nice. anytime that they have strayed from what they do good, it just makes me want to, go over to Square and just slap somebody. Because you have something that works, stick with it.
Yeah, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of things that work, um, was there a big change in the way that studios were doing business as far as the people that they hire? I noticed that, in your experience, and you had already told me that you had done some little, side gigs and stuff, drawing stuff early on, before you got in with Sierra. But it looked like you went through a stint of where you were just kind of doing contract work for whoever was around at the time. Did the whole industry kind of do that? Like start taking more like 1099 contractors
Yeah,
to do a bunch of the
yeah.
work?
There was a lot. There was a big. There was a little bit of a decline in around 2010, right around the housing
Yeah.
bubble.
Right.
A lot of layoffs that were happening, and it wasn't as easy. It's a little bit up and down sometimes, the industry, and there was a time there where I was just sort of just um, going freelance, doing as much freelance as I could do because I wasn't working at a city any longer, and so I was doing a lot of freelance at that time. So that was mainly that reason. Mainly that was the gist of it. I mean, and I can see that was around the same time that a lot of mobile games were starting to make their rise.
Yeah.
It's around 2010. It's the first. I think that was around the first iPhone. It was like 2009, somewhere
Yeah.
like that. I don't remember when, but yeah. So a lot of mobile games were making a huge splash, and it was having an impact on what people were willing to pay for games. And so
Yeah.
people were paying 99 cents for Angry Birds, or $1.99 for Angry Birds, and getting a lot of replayability out of it. So
Yeah.
they $60 for a game that you got 20 hours of gameplay. If you're lucky, if you're real good at playing the game, you might get less. And the development cycle was a lot longer to make a game that ended up being $60 versus a mobile
Right.
game that take you 3 months, maybe 6 months to make, and they could make millions of dollars quickly. It was a weird time for sure to see how that was a big change. But yeah, there were a lot of companies, and still are a lot of companies, that are doing contract work. So it's a lot. It's become more of a norm, I think, now than it was 10 years ago, to be more contract
You know,
oriented.
that makes me think too, going back to what you were talking about earlier, where just the nature of how these gaming industries evolved, they started um, kind of placing people in niches that they were
Yeah,
good at. And
yeah,
so I mean, almost this is like a follow on to that, where it's like, hey, I need somebody that can do, the best Tyrannosaurus. And so I don't need to have just somebody who can kind of do everything, but I just want to go out and pay somebody to do this one thing. And so
yeah,
that, I feel like that further kind of gets people down to very granular specificity on the kind of things that they can offer to other companies.
yeah. It's good and bad, I guess, depending on the artist. Yeah, I'm lucky in the sense that I'm capable of doing a lot of different things, so I can wear a
Right.
lot of
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
hats. So it makes me maybe a little bit more valuable. I'm not sure, but um, the fact that I can do both 2D and 3D is probably a benefit to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it gets me. Um, I've never had to worry about work, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I can't complain. But yeah, at the same time, it is strange that that's where we are. But yeah, it's very different from when it used to be. That's for sure. Because when I started at Sierra, they were actually paying people like a royalty. You got a royalty from every game you worked on.
Yeah. There's
Which
no
is
way
pretty
studios would do that now, right?
Oh, no. It stopped. I mean, they even stopped doing it at Sierra Online when I was there. I was like, but then, after that, I never worked in another studio that ever did that. So,
Yeah. Wow. Well, speaking of strange things, I have got to ask you about this Synergy Blue. So
okay.
when I looked up Synergy Blue, it said that they made lotto games.
Yep.
And so you went from Obsidian working on some great titles, Asheron's Call, and wound up for a stint making games for lotto machines.
Well, in between there, I worked on my own game. That I was a mobile game that I worked on. So I was always pretty busy. So if I'm not working, I'm working for myself. I'm working on my own projects. So
right.
I worked on my own game, and so it just it was interesting because the company was looking for artists, and so I said, okay, I'm gonna see what they're looking for, and they were out in Palm Desert at the time, and which is in California, but
very, very hot there.
Yeah, it was so hot,
and nothing else around for miles and miles.
It had its perks, but it was there weren't very many perks. It was nice though. I met a lot of great people, and I met a really good friend there, who's still my friend to this day. But he's now working in a different company. But he and I hit it off at the interview because I just said, well, I'm gonna drive over there and see what they're about, and found out what they're working on. And what they were working on was an interesting idea which I found interesting. It's casino games, which I have no interest in. I don't gamble. I don't go to casinos. But what was cool was they were working on making kind of like I guess mobile style games for casino, like for like a gambling style game. So it was like you would do, and it would be like Angry Birds, and for every time you would pull back the little thing to launch the bird, it was a gambling event. So it was really weird, but it was cool at the same time. So it was an interesting concept to me, and on top of it, I got to they licensed my game. So because it was a mobile game, so they ended up licensing my game, which is kind of cool. Didn't go anywhere, didn't make any money off of it, but it was still cool. And I got to see it. They actually turned it into a casino game, and it was in a casino for whatever, a fart in the wind, and and then but it was still cool, and it was doing nothing really different than I had ever worked on before. So it wasn't like I was doing something unique. I was still doing artwork. It was still the same kind of artwork I was doing in traditional video games. It was just for a different type of game.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of my wife, which I said, she's an artist. She's never held a job where her primary focus was to draw things. But they have always been around designing stuff in one form or another. So when she was a pastry chef, what she wound up doing is she had her own business where she made wedding cakes. And so I've found that a lot of creative people, I mean, that's kind of the lifestyle is, you're constantly working on a new something. There's always something around the corner that is another project that you want to work on, another thing that you want to learn how to do. So
Yeah.
that's just it's crazy the things that you fall into. There's probably not a whole lot of people out there that can say, yeah, hey, I worked on casino games. Um,
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's a really weird, it's a very different industry.
yeah, yeah,
Very similar to the game industry, but very, also very different because it's just the artists are pretty much the same,
yeah,
but what you're working on is just, how you're doing your job day to day is pretty much the same. It's just that there's just there's math involved that I'm not involved with, but like there's this whole other element that I like learned. I'm like, what is this? They have to figure out because there's a whole department that has to figure out all the math involved and making it work legally,
right,
to
yeah,
adhere to the laws, the gambling laws, and all these things like that. And I had no knowledge about that at all before getting into that. But it was an interesting learning, um, you know, I guess for myself to just figure out like, oh, that's kind of cool.
yeah. Well, if I don't hurry up and get to Pantheon, somebody's going to stop listening. Um, so we finally caught up. That you have this wealth of experience and knowledge by this point, um, but you're not working for Visionary Realms. You hear about Pantheon, Rise of Fallen somewhere.
Yeah.
How did that go down?
Well, I was just, I don't remember exactly where I was, but I was just I don't think it was just searching around on the internet for games, just a new MMO because I was curious. I'd played. There weren't any MMOs out there that were piquing my interests, and like I just wasn't into WoW anymore. I'd done my time in that game, and I had played it for 10 years.
Yeah, yep.
And I'm like, okay, I'm just done. And I was just everything was burning me out, and all the other MMOs were just sort of pretty much the same cookie cutter formula.
But
And
you
some of the
enjoyed
ones that,
obviously you enjoyed WoW while you were playing it though.
oh
So
yeah, I absolutely loved it. It was. I mean, I was addicted to that thing for probably the first 8 years. I was just nosediving into that game all day long, and but then the last two, I was just really just burnout, and I was just came to my senses. But as far as the this finding out about Pantheon, I was just sort of like I said, hunting around on the internet for a new MMO, and I don't know this. I think it was Alex Sensual. Somebody named Alex Sensual. I never heard of this person, but it popped up on YouTube. I'm like, and he's talking about and I started watching the video. I'm like, this game sounds kind of cool. And so based on his descriptions of it, and I don't even think you can find his videos anymore, but like I started searching for that game and then came across Co Carnage, and that's when I started seeing more information. So I watched a number of his videos, and then went to the website and sort of dropped. I think it was like $50 or something on one of them,
pledge
and then
package, yeah,
the
yeah.
pledge package, and then I just sort of kept increasing my pledge, and the more I heard, the more I increased my pledge until I was up until until I said I'm gonna go in and see what's going on here.
And so went all the way pre-alpha.
Went all the way pre-alpha.
Wow.
So yeah, yeah. And that's
So
pretty much how I found it.
so having a WoW background, then there's a ton of people that I know that follow the game that got in because of Brad. And so were you familiar with EQ?
Oh yeah, that was my first MMO. Really,
It was okay.
Yeah, EQ was my first MMO back in '99. Played it for 4 years with a bunch of friends. Never really got. I wasn't as hardcore as most or as many, but I loved it. I just loved how you just the feeling of that kind of game at that time, and exploring this open world and roaming around and just getting your butt handed to you by random creatures that just you just kind of walk up and or just starts chasing you, and you're just running around looking for the zone entrance or the zone exit so you can just get the heck out of there. And that was all very fun, and like that's how I learned about Brad and the studio. But yeah, it was definitely my first game. That one was, and then consequently, I played a number of MMOs after that, like Dark Age of Camelot.
Yeah,
was another big one I played.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by how many people went over to Dark Age of Camelot, being a whole lot more PvP.
It scratched my itch because I was a big before MMOs came along. I was a first-person shooter player. I was playing like at Sierra Online after work. We would just be playing Doom or Quake and Blood and Duke Nukem and Descent and a little bit everything we could get our hands on. We play on the network there, and so that was where I kind of had that thirst to murder, I guess.
Your fellow gamers, yes.
Yes. So that's probably the PvP comes into play, where I saw that this might be kind of cool. It mixes both an MMO and a little bit of PvP. So
yeah, I tried early on, when Quake was coming out and all of those good ones. I was the worst first person shooter player ever. I was insta kill as soon as I spawned. And so I spent a long time kind of molding and shaping my daughter, who's a teenager now, to enjoy MMOs so that I would have someone to play with. And as soon as she's old enough to not want to play what I want to play, she goes out and becomes a fantastic first-person shooter player. And so now I can't get her to play anything with me. All she ever wants to do is play FPSs. So, oh gosh, yeah. Apex is probably her.
Apex
her
Legends,
yes. Hours and hours and hours and hours.
Yeah,
and she's really good. Like I would never want to play her ever.
I was highly competitive back in the day, but now I just can't play those games anymore.
Well, you don't have time. You're too busy now. You got so much to do. So you come on board as an artist. Obviously, they've been ramping up the amount of people and everything coming into the project. But now that you've been in there for a little while, and you've been following the game for, obviously for a long time too. Like I have
5 years, I think, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember what it was like in a lot of those early years, 16, 17, 18, and the direction that everyone was talking about conceptually the game going. And then, unfortunately, we have Brad's passing like right in the middle of creating this game. And since then, there's had a lot of decisions that had to be made for the game. Do you feel like Brad's DNA is still on the game?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's without a doubt, it's still there. It's visually people might think that there's something lost or something that that's it. I mean, really, that's the only thing that's changed was the art. The foundation is still there. It's from at least where I sit, nothing's really changed. Nope.
Yeah, I haven't noticed a whole lot of it either. The small decisions that obviously are always going to have to be made when you go from a very conceptual game like it was early on. Even when people think back to kind of the stuff when they really got it into following Pantheon, everything was, bought out of the store. Everything was like, hey, let's throw this together and see how this works as a concept. If we have a dungeon that looks like this. And
right. That was the big part of that people didn't quite understand it. Like when I was sitting in the audience, I was pretty much, I understood what was happening, even though I wasn't completely, I wasn't on the team or anything. I just knew from my own personal experiences, pretty much when I heard something come from the team, I could read between the lines about what was possibly happening without knowing 100% what was happening. But it was a lot of things that needed to change. And so, when I came on board, I was notified that they wanted to change the artwork. So I was kind of shocked myself personally when I heard about it. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant, to the game. And so I've sort of took a couple of days and looked at the art style, and I started thinking about how could we make this work, and how could it work? And so I believed it. Once I digested the look of it and looked past just the initial, just being shocked by the look of it, the change,
right,
that I was used to, just like everybody else. I realized that it was the best choice because it was the only choice really for a small team to kind of be able to knock out as much artwork that was needed to be knocked out in as much time, it was least amount of time possible, and still get the game done. It's just a lot. I mean, so I don't know how other small indie studios do it without buying pre-purchased assets. So it's a lot of work to do your own assets.
And that kind of gets to one of the follow-up questions. Thinking about this, do you think that the indie studio approach to making games, and in particular crowdfunded, because now you have to have, in a way, you have to have buy-in from all these, thousands upon thousands of people who are buying into the vision that you have, not that you have to acquiesce to demands that they have or whatever. But do you think that just adds another wrinkle of complexity to being able to push out a game when you have people that don't have your experience, right? They haven't worked in the gaming industry, and they see back in 2017, walking around Hounder's Cave. I remember 2018 when they started fleshing out Black Rose Keep for the first time, and they're looking at this and they're thinking, "Oh man, this game is going to look, exactly like this." And to you, you're thinking, "Oh, this is in really early stages of development. I kind of like, some of the decisions that they're making here." And everyone else is thinking, "Oh, well, that's it. That's what they just built. That's what it's going to look like, where, this game is almost ready to be released." But don't you think that that's going to be a problem, an additional problem that comes from doing games, crowdfunded games on an indie level?
Are you asking if using store-bought assets as placeholder is the problem? Or
well, it's more of just having to do the things that you have to do, and not in a bad way, but the ignorance of the general public, because they get to see whatever you're releasing to the public, whatever you're comfortable releasing, without sometimes the understanding of, hey, look, as many times as you can say it over and over and over again, all of this is subject to change. None of this is, complete by any stretch of the imagination. And you say it 100 times over and over again. And still, when something changes about it, people are like, oh my goodness, I can't believe, they were changing that. How come they weren't working on the real thing to begin with?
Well, part of that is because I do think that it's kind of like newspaper headlines. Some people read the headlines, but then don't read the article.
Right.
So it feels like screenshots are the headlines, and they don't really follow the game as much as they might think they do. Maybe I can't see. I'm obviously not saying that about everybody, because there are people that really are invested in, like they check constantly on what the latest and greatest things are, and they read every post, and they're really on it. But there are people that just only kind of glance, and so they only see the new screenshots, and then they wonder what the heck happened, because they didn't really follow all the information leading up to it, right? So it is a problem, and it is, but it's also, sort of what has to happen. I mean,
exactly.
It's the nature of indie development and crowdfunded development. It's sort of like you're under the spotlight. Very different. It's very unique place to be in. I've never worked on a crowdfunded game before. It's unique for me, to, even though it's very similar, and I mean, not doing anything different on the project that I would do on any other game. It's just a bigger scope of it. Smaller team, bigger scope, more assets to create. But overall, it's different because we're constantly being scrutinized. I mean, the team is
correct.
People are always looking at, under a microscope, and you just sort of, I just have to step away. I can't really, I know better than to just cling to every word that a developer says. It's sort of just because it's in my own best interest, but it's, I can't listen to all of the positives or the negative things that everybody says in the community. I want the game to be great, just like everybody else does. Yeah. So that's all I'm really hoping to try and make happen. So it's rough. It's rough sometimes.
Well, getting back to the art, just for a second, were there any competing styles when you came in, or had they pretty much chosen a path that they thought was going to work the best?
They had pretty much had an idea of what they really wanted. They really had kind of a style that they were shooting for. It wasn't completely, it's sort of changing because we are listening to the community after the initial release of some of the images and things. There was a lot of, feedback, negative, positive, what have you. And, I'm listening. Everybody on the team wants everybody to be happy, to as much as possible, right? To the degree that we can. We're not going to make everybody happy, unfortunately, but we do. I have listened, and we are changing. We are making subtle changes that will ultimately, I believe, will be a great kind of compromise, for lack of a better word, to make everybody, I think the community will be happier than they were probably maybe 3 months ago or 4 months ago when they first saw that initial drop of,
and you can, and you can certainly see that, just in comments. Obviously it took a lot of people by surprise. And I think there have been a lot of kind of, like you said, subtle changes here and there, that are going more in the direction of grittiness.
There it is.
I don't know if anybody's ever heard that term before, but I also think that part of it is just like you had to take a minute and just absorb the change first. I know when I first saw the images, I didn't take nearly as long as some others, and in particular, the ones that I knew of were people who had been testing the game for quite some time by that point. And so, I can imagine that if you're as invested as, actually being able to go in there, participate in pre-alphas, you're seeing the game a lot, and then to have that change, I can understand their, kind of knee-jerk reaction to it. But I do feel like just over time, as people have been able to digest the change and take a minute and just realize that the change is here and it's real, that they've actually come to enjoy the art style much more than maybe they thought they would have.
Yeah, and I think that there's even more changes coming. So we are kind of I don't know. There's a bit of cross pollination happening where we're gonna keep the painted appearance, but we're starting internally. This is all something we talked about last year, but it's going to take place this year. Is that we're going to be bringing in even more like realistic lighting than what you're currently seeing. So it'll kind of ground this painted look in a reality, so it won't look so cartoony.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's something to be aware of, that like that's coming. So there's going to be some visual changes coming that we just did a test last night, and to see what they would look like, what these assets would look like in the new lighting, and they look great. So in my opinion, it looks so cool. It's a nice marriage of realistic with kind of stylization. So it's a very cool mix that I'm happy that we're finally getting there. And I think a lot of the people who are not in the camp of liking the stylized look or painted look, I think that they'll come around more, even more so now.
Okay. Art
being dropped.
Yeah. What's one of your favorite things that's going to be coming into the game as far as art assets? What are you looking forward to?
Oh man, there's a bunch. Don't know when it's going to come, but there's work being done right now on Halnir. Oh, not Halnir, excuse me. Take that back. Hangor, and some lovin's been done on Mad Run. So those places are going to look pretty sweet when they're done. They're not close to being done, but they're not too far off either. So they're in the near future. I don't want to say I'm not going to say the dreaded word, but I won't use it.
Yeah. Steer clear.
You know what I mean? It's off in the distance, but it's there. It's in sight. It's just that,
right. Yeah.
It's going to be. Yeah.
And I know that Hangor is one of the ones that, that obviously has had a lot of iteration on it over the years and years. At least as far back to my recollection as 2018, 2019. I remember one broadcast that they did that showed just where it was placing and being able to pick up the assets and move them to a completely different place on the map, which was a fantastic place for them to put it. So, I mean, it's gone through a lot of iteration. So I know that the last time that they showed stuff when it was the old art style, it looked really good as far as the layout.
Yeah. That layout is probably not changing. So that's location still there. It's just going to be, we just need to get through and start that conversion of all the assets that are in there to the new style. Because a lot of those assets were believe there were assets from store purchased type of assets that need to all be converted and all done in-house. So that's all, that's why it's a bit off in the distance. But like right now it's the two places that have been converted the most are Hangor and Mad Run. So there's just a lot of little fine tuning and like polish past stuff that needs to be done on those two regions of AVP. But
I am very excited about that. I am very excited about that. I'm an orc fan, so can't wait to get in there and mix it up with them for sure. All right. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer, Chris, but I did want to try to selfishly get a couple of beans if I could. And we still have Mr. Dean lurking in the background who's greedily trying to hang on to them. But I'll see what I can do. Obviously I'm a big lore nerd for this game. Having pored over it for years now for no reason whatsoever other than I don't know, I'm bored. And I've really enjoyed kind of the history of the world and how it will continue to play out this kind of overarching storyline in the world. It's very, very exciting. And that was one of the things that drew me to it. And then just having the perception system and all the things that could be in the future. Very, very exciting. But I'm going to see if I can get any of my pressing questions about kind of how the lore interacts with the game, if I can. Everybody is pretty familiar with Black Rose Creek, BRK, and what it used to look like. It's been on a ton of streams so far. When everybody gets back in there, I know we were just talking about Hangor. When everybody is allowed to get back in Black Rose Keep, are they going to see it as familiar, or is it going to be kind of another, I wouldn't say large rework, but is it going to be familiar to the players that get back in there, or is it going to look pretty different?
I think that like we're not there yet, but in my imagination that there's probably going to be some slight alterations. But overall, I wouldn't suspect to see huge sweeping changes to that area at all. I mean, outside the style of the artwork itself, I would expect that, what you saw the last time, or what I saw the last time for that matter. Those big giant, they increase the size of it. And so it's larger. The zone is larger. There's a lot more climbable areas. Big valley below kind of thing. That's not going to change. That whole layout. It's not going to change. I would expect to see pretty much the same. What you would expect, what most everybody else would expect to see.
Well, then just one request then. Just make sure that they increase the grittiness.
That's happening. That's happening.
So increase the grittiness in Black Rose Keep, and I think we'll be okay.
We're shooting for grit across the board these days. It's
written on a Post-it note on everybody's computer screen as they work.
It's like heavy on the grit.
That's so funny. Chris, I really appreciate you hanging out and just having a conversation with me. In all sincerity, it's been a pleasure interacting with you on Discord, on forums, stuff like that. I've been familiar with you for a little while, And it was just nice to sit down and have a conversation about some stuff.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I appreciate you asking and having me here. It was fun.
Ben, I really appreciate you making this happen for me.
Let me tell you, I've been doing this for a long time, an awful long time. Well, comparatively, I guess it depends. But for about 16 years, I've been doing a lot of journalism and game marketing and that sort of thing. And I got to tell you, man, that is probably one of the